The wedding dress was the first thing Jake noticed. White silk draped across the woman's shoulders as she stumbled through the door of Blue Moon Diner, her veil trailing behind her like a broken promise. Mascara streaked down her cheeks, and her hands shook as she clutched a small purse to her chest. Every conversation in the diner stopped mid-sentence. Jake looked up from his coffee, where he'd been reviewing his daughter Lily's homework, and felt his paramedic instincts kick in immediately. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The woman swayed on her feet, clearly in some form of shock. Her breathing was rapid and shallow, classic signs of a panic attack or severe emotional distress. Without hesitation, Jake stood from his booth and approached her carefully, the way he'd learned to approach trauma victims during his years as an EMT. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked softly, holding his hands visible and non-threatening. "Do you need medical attention?" She looked up at him with wild, desperate eyes. I can't breathe properly," she whispered. "Everything I thought I knew was a lie." Jake gently guided her to an empty booth in the corner, away from the staring crowd. "My name's Jake. I'm a trained paramedic. Can you tell me your name?" "Emma," she managed between shallow breaths. "Emma Collins. I was supposed to be Emma Davidson in about 2 hours, but—" Her voice trailed off as fresh tears began to flow. Jake reached into his jacket and pulled out a small paper bag from his emergency kit, something he always carried out of habit. "Emma, I need you to breathe into this bag for me. Slow, controlled breaths. That's it." As Emma's breathing began to stabilize, Jake noticed more details. Her wedding dress was expensive, clearly custom-made. The diamond ring on her finger could have paid his mortgage for a year. This wasn't just any bride having cold feet. Something serious had happened. "Where were you supposed to be married?" Jake asked gently, still monitoring her vital signs with practiced efficiency. "St. Catherine's Church, about 30 miles from here," Emma replied, her voice gaining strength. "Marcus, my fiancé, he—" She stopped, her hands beginning to shake again. "Take your time," Jake encouraged. "Whatever happened, you're safe here." Emma looked around the diner, taking in the curious but concerned faces of the locals. Cedar Falls had always been the kind of place where strangers were welcomed, not judged. "I found out this morning that Marcus has been living 3 separate lives. 3 different families, 3 different wives." The words hung in the air like a physical weight. Jake felt his jaw tighten involuntarily. As a single father who'd lost his wife to cancer 3 years ago, the idea of someone betraying marriage vows so completely made his stomach turn. "3 families?" Jake asked, needing to understand the full scope of what she'd discovered. Emma nodded and reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. "His business trips. He told me he was in pharmaceuticals, traveling to different regions. Turns out he was maintaining households in Denver, Phoenix, and Miami, all with wives who thought they were his only family, all with children who call him daddy." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Bank statements showing mortgage payments to houses I'd never heard of. The diner had gradually returned to its normal hum of conversation, but Jake noticed several locals still glancing their way with concern. Betty, the longtime waitress, approached their table with a pot of coffee and a plate of her famous blueberry muffins. "Honey, you look like you could use some comfort food," Betty said kindly, setting down the plate. "And Jake, your Lily called the diner looking for you. Told her she'd be home soon." Jake checked his watch. He'd promised to take Lily to the park after lunch, but looking at Emma's fragile state, he couldn't just walk away. "Emma, do you have somewhere safe to go? Family nearby?" She shook her head. "I moved here from Oregon 6 months ago from Marcus. Left my job, my friends, everything. My parents died in a car accident 2 years ago. I thought Marcus was my new beginning." Jake felt a familiar, protective instinct rising, the same one that had driven him through countless emergency calls. "Listen, I know this is overwhelming, but you can't stay in that wedding dress. And you need to think about your safety. If Marcus realizes you've discovered his secret—" "He already knows," Emma interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I confronted him this morning before I ran. He didn't deny it, he just kept saying I didn't understand, that he could explain everything. He said all 3 relationships were real to him, that he loved all of us equally." Jake stared at her in disbelief. "He actually said that?" "Word for word. Then he had the audacity to suggest we could still get married, that nothing had to change between us, that his other families were separate from what we had together." Emma's voice cracked with a mixture of pain and anger. Jake had seen a lot of trauma in his years as a paramedic, but the calculated cruelty of Marcus's deception was unlike anything he had encountered. "Emma, you did the right thing by leaving. A man who can compartmentalize relationships like that, who can look his supposed life partner in the eye and lie every single day, that's not someone you can trust with your future." Emma wiped her eyes with a napkin Betty had provided. "I know that logically, but I gave up everything for him. My career, my apartment, my independence. I don't even know who I am anymore without the life we built together." "You're someone brave enough to walk away from a lie, even when it cost you everything," Jake said firmly. "That takes more strength than most people will ever need to find." Jake's phone buzzed with a text from his babysitter asking about pickup time for Lily. He glanced at Emma, still fragile but no longer in immediate medical distress, and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "I know this might sound strange, but I have a guest room at my house. My daughter Lily and I, we live quietly but safely. If you need a place to figure out your next steps, you're welcome to stay until you get back on your feet." Emma looked up at him with surprise. "You don't even know me. Why would you help a complete stranger?" Jake thought about his late wife Sarah and how she'd always said that kindness was never wasted, even when it wasn't returned. "Because everyone deserves a chance to rebuild their life with dignity. And because my daughter needs to see that there are still good people in the world who help others." Emma studied his face, searching for any hidden motive or red flag. What she saw was genuine compassion from a man who understood loss and the importance of human decency. "Just until I can figure out what comes next." "However long you need," Jake replied, already thinking about how he'd explain the situation to 6-year-old Lily in age-appropriate terms. As they prepared to leave the diner, Emma asked the question that had been haunting her all morning. How does someone live 3 separate lives like that? How do you lie to people you claim to love every single day? Jake held the door open for her, considering her question carefully. "I think some people are so afraid of being alone that they'd rather live multiple lives than
one truth. But Emma, what matters now is that you chose truth, even when it was the hardest choice you'll ever make." Jake's house sat at the end of Maple Street, a modest 2-story home with blue shutters and a wraparound porch that had seen better days. The front yard was scattered with Lily's toys, a pink bicycle with training wheels leaning against the oak tree that dominated the lawn. As they pulled into the driveway, Jake noticed Emma's hands had stopped trembling, though she still clutched her purse like a lifeline. "It's not much," Jake said, turning off the engine of his pickup truck, "but it's peaceful here." Emma looked at the house, taking in the children's chalk drawings on the sidewalk and the wind chimes that tinkled softly from the porch ceiling. After months of living in Marcus's sterile downtown penthouse, with its marble floors and abstract art that made her feel like a visitor in her own life, the warmth of Jake's home was almost overwhelming. "It looks perfect," she said quietly. The front door burst open before they reached the porch steps, and a whirlwind of blonde curls and boundless energy came racing toward them. Lily had inherited her mother's delicate features, but her father's determined spirit, evident in the way she skidded to a stop, just short of colliding with the adults. "Daddy, Mrs. Patterson said you were helping someone at the diner," Lily announced, her eyes immediately drawn to Emma's elaborate wedding dress. "Are you a princess?" Jake crouched down to his daughter's eye level, a gesture Emma had already come to recognize as characteristic of his patient parenting style. "Lily, this is Miss Emma. She's had a very difficult day, and she's going to stay with us for a while as our guest." Lily studied Emma with the unfiltered curiosity of childhood. "Why are you wearing a wedding dress? Did you get married today?" The innocent question hit Emma like a physical blow. She felt her composure, carefully maintained since leaving the diner, beginning to crack again. Jake noticed immediately and stood, placing a protective hand on Emma's shoulder. "Sometimes adults have to change their plans, sweetheart," Jake explained gently. "Miss Emma decided not to get married today, and that was a very brave decision." Lily pondered this with the seriousness of someone far beyond her 6 years. "My mama used to say that being brave means doing the right thing even when it's scary." Emma felt tears threatening again, but this time they were mixed with something else. Wonder, perhaps, at the wisdom that could emerge from such a young voice. "Your mommy sounds like she was very smart." "She was," Lily said matter-of-factly. "She went to heaven when I was little, but Daddy says she still watches over us. Do you want to see my room? I have a dollhouse that Daddy built." Jake caught Emma's eye over Lily's head, silently asking if she was ready for the enthusiastic tour his daughter was clearly prepared to provide. Emma nodded, grateful for the distraction from her own thoughts. The inside of Jake's home reflected the same comfortable warmth as its exterior. Family photos lined the hallway walls, chronicling Lily's growth from infancy to her current gap-toothed smile. Emma paused at one particular picture, a family portrait that must have been taken shortly before Jake's wife passed away. The woman had kind eyes and a gentle smile, her arms wrapped around both Jake and baby Lily with unmistakable love. "That's Mommy," Lily said, following Emma's gaze. "Daddy says I have her eyes but his stubborn chin." Jake chuckled despite himself. "She's not wrong about the stubborn part." As they moved through the house, Emma was struck by how different it felt from the carefully curated spaces she'd grown accustomed to with Marcus. This home was lived in, loved in. Lily's artwork decorated the refrigerator, and there were worn spots on the furniture where people actually sat and relaxed. It was the kind of home Emma had dreamed of creating, but had never quite achieved in her previous relationship. "The guest room is upstairs," Jake said, leading them up a staircase lined with more family photos. "It's not fancy, but it has a good view of the garden." The guest room was simple but clean, with a quilt-covered bed and a small desk positioned near the window. Emma could see Lily's swing set in the backyard, along with the vegetable garden that showed Jake's careful attention to detail. Everything about the space spoke of stability and care, qualities that had been notably absent from her life with Marcus. "I can bring you some clothes," Jake offered, clearly recognizing that Emma couldn't remain in her wedding dress indefinitely. "My wife was about your size, and I haven't been able to bring myself to donate her things yet." Emma felt the weight of his offer. Wearing another woman's clothes felt intimate in a way that made her uncomfortable, but her alternatives were limited. "Are you sure that would be all right?" "Sarah would have wanted her things to help someone who needed them," Jake said with quiet certainty. "She was always bringing home strays, both human and animal. It's what she would have done." As Jake went to retrieve clothes from what Emma assumed was his bedroom, Lily lingered in the doorway, studying their guest with unabashed fascination. "Miss Emma, why did you decide not to get married?" she asked with the directness that only children could manage. Emma sat down on the edge of the bed, considering how to explain such a complex situation to someone so young. "Sometimes we discover that the person we thought we knew isn't really who they pretended to be," she said carefully. Lily nodded as if this made perfect sense.
Like when Tommy Morrison at school said he was good at sharing, but then he took my graham crackers and didn't give them back? Despite everything, Emma found herself smiling. Something like that, yes. Daddy says the most important thing is to be honest, even when it's hard, Lily continued. He says lies always make everything worse, even little ones. The wisdom of Jake's parenting philosophy wasn't lost on Emma. Marcus had built their entire relationship on lies, layers upon layers of deception that had ultimately collapsed under their own weight. The contrast between the two men couldn't have been more stark. Jake returned with an armload of clothes, his expression carefully neutral despite what Emma could only imagine was the emotional difficulty of retrieving his late wife's belongings. "There's a variety here," he said, setting the clothes on the bed. "Jeans, sweaters, some dresses, whatever feels comfortable." Emma ran her fingers over a soft blue cardigan, touched by the generosity of the gesture. "Thank you. For everything. I know this is strange, taking in a complete stranger." "You're not a stranger," Lily declared from the doorway. "You're our guest. Daddy says guests become friends if you treat them right." Jake's phone buzzed, and his expression grew serious as he read the message. "Emma, there's something you need to know. That was my friend at the police department. Someone matching Marcus's description was asking questions at the diner about an hour ago. Betty told him she hadn't seen anyone matching your description." Emma felt her blood run cold. "He's looking for me." "It appears so. The question is, what do you want to do about it?" Emma's mind raced. She had nowhere else to go, no family to turn to, no friends in Cedar Falls who could help her. Marcus knew about her limited resources, in fact, encouraged her dependence on him throughout their relationship. The realization that his control had been so complete made her sick. "I don't know," she admitted. "He has resources, connections. If he really wants to find me, then we make sure you're protected. Cedar Falls is a small town, but we look out for our own. And as of today, you're one of ours." The simple declaration brought tears to her eyes again. After months of feeling isolated and dependent, the idea that someone would stand up for her without expecting anything in return was almost too much to process. Was quiet for a moment, his gaze moving to his daughter, who had wandered over to the window and was pointing out various features of the backyard to Emma. "After Sarah died, this community rallied around us in ways I never could have imagined. People brought meals for weeks, helped with childcare, made sure Lily and I never felt alone. I learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is show up for someone when they need it most." Emma understood that Jake's offer wasn't just charity. It was part of a larger philosophy of community support that had sustained him through his own darkest moments. The idea that she could be part of that kind of network, even temporarily, was both foreign and deeply appealing. "What if he causes trouble for you?" Emma pressed. "What if he tries to make your life difficult?" Jake's expression hardened slightly, and Emma caught a glimpse of the strength that lay beneath his gentle demeanor. "Let me worry about that. Marcus might have fooled 3 women for years, but bullies like him typically don't know how to handle someone who fights back." Emma realized that Jake had already made his decision, that his offer of protection wasn't conditional on her gratitude or her ability to contribute to the household. It was simply the right thing to do as far as he was concerned. "Daddy," Lily called from the window, "there's a fancy car driving really slowly down our street. It stopped in front of Mrs. Chen's house." Jake moved to the window immediately, his posture shifting into something more alert and focused. Emma joined him, peering through the lace curtains at a sleek black sedan that was indeed moving at a crawl down their quiet residential street. "Is that him?" Jake asked quietly. Emma's stomach dropped as she recognized the distinctive profile behind the wheel. "That's Marcus." Jake's mind switched into emergency mode, the same focused calm that had served him through countless medical crises. He gently but firmly guided Lily away from the window, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "Lily, I need you to go to your room and play with your dollhouse for a while," he said, maintaining the even tone that wouldn't alarm his daughter.
take your tablet and put on your headphones. Can you do that for Daddy?" Lily looked between her father and Emma, sensing the sudden tension, but trusting her father's judgment completely. "Okay, Daddy. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just some grown-up stuff we need to handle." As soon as Lily's footsteps disappeared down the hallway, Jake turned to Emma with laser focus. "How dangerous is he? I need to know what we're dealing with." Emma's face had gone pale, her hand shaking again as she watched Marcus's car continue its slow prowl down the street. "He's never been physically violent, but he's manipulative, controlling. He convinced me to cut ties with most of my friends back in Oregon, said they were jealous of our relationship. He monitored my spending, knew where I was at all times." Jake absorbed this information, recognizing the classic patterns of psychological abuse. "Does he have any connection to law enforcement, political influence?" "His pharmaceutical company has contracts with several government agencies. He knows people, has favors he can call in." Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. "Jake, I'm scared. Not just for me, but for you and Lily. If he thinks—" "Hey," Jake interrupted, moving closer and speaking with quiet authority. "Look at me, Emma. I've dealt with dangerous situations before. During my paramedic years, I saw the worst of what people can do to each other. The key is staying smart and staying prepared." Marcus's sedan had stopped directly in front of Jake's house now. Through the curtains, they could see him talking on his phone, occasionally gesturing toward the property. The calculated nature of his surveillance sent chills down Emma's spine. "He's probably calling someone," Emma said, her breathing becoming rapid again. "Marcus doesn't do anything without backup plans." Jake moved to his bedroom
and returned with a small lockbox, from which he retrieved his service weapon, a decision that reflected the seriousness with which he viewed the threat. "I have a concealed carry permit. I'm trained and certified, but I'm hoping we won't need it." Emma stared at the weapon, the reality of her situation hitting her with fresh force. "This is insane. 6 hours ago, I was supposed to be walking down the aisle. Now I'm hiding in a stranger's house while my ex-fiancé stalks me." "You're not hiding," Jake corrected firmly. "You're regrouping. There's a difference." Marcus's car door opened, and he stepped out onto the sidewalk. Even from a distance, his expensive suit and confident bearing marked him as someone accustomed to getting his way. He straightened his tie and began walking toward Jake's front door with the casual arrogance of a man who had never been truly challenged. "He's coming to the door," Jake observed, his tone remaining remarkably calm. "Emma, I want you to go upstairs to Lily's room. Stay with her and keep her calm. Lock the door and don't come out until I tell you it's safe." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to have a conversation with your former fiancé and make it clear that he's not welcome here." Emma hesitated, torn between her fear of confronting Marcus and her concern for Jake's safety. He's not going to just leave quietly. Marcus always gets what he wants. Then it's time he learned a different lesson. The doorbell rang, followed immediately by firm knocking. Marcus wasn't waiting for a polite response. Emma could hear Marcus's voice through the door, smooth and commanding, the same tone he'd used to convince her to uproot her entire life for him. "Hello? I'm looking for a young woman who may need assistance. I believe she might have been in some kind of accident." Jake motioned for Emma to go upstairs, waiting until he heard her footsteps on the second floor before approaching the front door. He checked the security chain and peephole, taking a moment to study Marcus's demeanor. The man looked exactly as Emma had described, polished and confident, but there was something predatory in his eyes that set Jake's instincts on high alert. "Can I help you?" Jake called through the door, not opening it. "I hope so. My name is Marcus Davidson. I'm looking for my fiancée, Emma Collins. There was some kind of misunderstanding this morning, and she left our wedding venue in distress. I'm concerned for her welfare." Jake noted the calculated phrasing, the way Marcus presented himself as the concerned partner, rather than the source of Emma's distress. "I haven't seen anyone matching that description. You might want to check with the local police if you're worried about someone's safety."
I have reason to believe she may have come to this address. A witness at the diner said she left with a man driving a blue pickup truck. Marcus's tone remained pleasant, but there was steel underneath. I just want to make sure she's all right. Surely you can understand my concern. Jake realized that Marcus had indeed done his homework, tracking Emma's movements with efficiency that spoke to resources and determination. Like I said, I can't help you. Have a good evening. Sir, I'm not leaving until I know Emma is safe. I have 3 children who are worried about their stepmother. This family emergency requires immediate resolution. The mention of children was clearly calculated to tug at Jake's sympathies, but the reference to Emma as a stepmother to Marcus's secret families only strengthened Jake's resolve. Mr. Davidson, you need to leave my property, now. Marcus's facade finally cracked slightly, revealing the controlling personality Emma had described. I know she's in there. Emma, if you can hear me, we need to talk. What you saw this morning, it's not what you think. I can explain everything. Upstairs, Emma heard Marcus's voice and shivered at the familiar tone that now carried an unmistakable edge.
Felt her stomach turn. The reasonable, caring tone was exactly the same one he'd used during their relationship whenever he'd manipulated her into doing something against her better judgment. She pressed her ear against Lily's bedroom door, straining to hear Jake's response. Mr. Davidson, this is your final warning. Leave now, or I'm calling the police. The police won't help you. Marcus's voice turned cold. I have connections throughout this county. Emma is my fiancé, and this is a domestic matter. Interfering in someone else's family situation could have serious legal consequences for you. Jake felt his anger rising, but kept his voice level. Are you threatening me? I'm simply explaining the reality of the situation. Emma has been under significant stress lately. She's not thinking clearly. She needs medical attention, not some misguided stranger playing hero. The subtle attempt to paint Emma as mentally unstable while positioning himself as the reasonable party seeking help was exactly the kind of manipulation Jake had expected. Mr. Davidson, I'm going to count to 10. If you're not walking back to your car by the time I reach 10, I'm calling 911. You're making a serious mistake, Marcus warned. I take care of my family, and I don't appreciate interference from outsiders. 1, 2, 3. Marcus remained on the porch, clearly testing Jake's resolve. In the upstairs bedroom, Emma held Lily close, the little girl sensing the tension but trusting the adults to handle the situation. Emma's phone vibrated with a text message from an unknown number. Emma, stop this foolishness. You're embarrassing yourself and endangering these people. Come outside and we'll discuss this privately. Emma showed the message to Lily, who read it with the seriousness of someone much older than her 6 years. Miss Emma, that man doesn't sound very nice. 4, 5, 6. Marcus finally stepped back from the door, but he didn't move toward his car. Instead, he walked to the front window and cupped his hands against the glass, trying to peer inside. The brazenness of the action revealed his desperation and his disregard for normal boundaries. 7, 8. Jake opened the door, stepping onto the porch with his phone already dialing. Marcus turned to face him, and the 2 men stood separated by only a few feet, the contrast between them stark. Jake's calm determination versus Marcus's barely controlled frustration. 9. You have no idea who you're dealing with, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. I've built a life with Emma. I've invested time and resources in our relationship.
I'm not walking away from that investment because of one moment of female hysteria. The casual dismissal of Emma's legitimate concerns as female hysteria confirmed everything Jake needed to know about Marcus's character. 10. Jake pressed the call button as Marcus finally began walking back toward his car, but not before delivering one final threat. This isn't over. Emma knows where she belongs, and you have just made yourself part of a situation you don't understand. As Marcus drove away, Jake remained on the porch until the sedan disappeared around the corner. Only then did he call upstairs to let Emma and Lily know it was safe to come down. Emma descended the stairs slowly, her face etched with worry. What did he say? Exactly what you'd expect. Threats, manipulation, attempts to paint you as unstable. Jake secured the front door and activated the security system he'd installed after Sarah's death. But Emma, this confirms something important. His reaction tells me you made the right choice in leaving. He sent me a text, Emma said, showing Jake the message. He's not going to give up. Lily appeared at Emma's side, slipping her small hand into the adult's larger one. Miss Emma, Daddy always says bullies go away if you don't let them scare you. Jake smiled at his daughter's wisdom while privately acknowledging that Marcus was a more sophisticated threat than typical schoolyard bullies. Lily's right about not letting fear win, but we also need to be smart about protecting ourselves. Emma looked at the two
People who had shown her more genuine care in one afternoon than Marcus had demonstrated in months of their relationship. I should leave. I can't put you and Lily in danger because of my mistakes. Your mistakes? Jake's voice sharpened. Emma, you're not responsible for Marcus's deception over his threatening behavior, and you're not leaving. We're going to handle this together. As if summoned by the conversation, Jake's phone rang with a call from Officer Patricia Morrison, Cedar Falls evening shift supervisor. Jake? We had a complaint about a domestic disturbance at your address. Everything all right over there? Jake's jaw tightened. Marcus had indeed called in a report, exactly as he'd threatened. Pat, it's complicated. Can you swing by? I think you need to hear this story firsthand. Officer Patricia Morrison arrived within 15 minutes, her patrol car's presence immediately drawing the attention of curious neighbors. Jake had known Pat for years, their paths crossing frequently during his paramedic days when medical and police responses overlapped. She was thorough, fair, and had a particular talent for cutting through complicated situations to reach the truth. Pat stepped out of her vehicle with the measured confidence of someone who had handled domestic disputes for over a decade. Her salt and pepper hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her keen eyes took in the scene as she approached the porch where Jake waited. So what's this about a domestic disturbance? Pat asked, settling into one of Jake's porch chairs with the ease of an old friend. The complaint came from a Marcus Davidson, claiming his fiancé was being held against her will by a local resident. Jake provided a careful summary of the day's events, from Emma's arrival at the diner to Marcus's threatening behavior on his doorstep. Pat listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes, her expression growing more serious as the story unfolded. Where's the woman now? Pat asked. Inside with my daughter. She's scared, Pat. This isn't some lover's quarrel or wedding day jitters. The man has been living 3 separate lives with 3 different families. Pat's eyebrows rose. 3 families? That's a new one, even for me. She paused, considering the implications. Jake, I need to speak with her directly, get her side of the story. Emma appeared at the front door before Jake could call for her, having heard the patrol car arrive. She had changed out of her wedding dress into a pair of Sarah's jeans and a soft green sweater, looking more like herself but still carrying the weight of the day's trauma. Officer Morrison. Emma approached cautiously. I'm Emma Collins. I assume you're here because of Marcus. Pat studied Emma with professional assessment, looking for signs of coercion or distress that might indicate she was indeed being held against her will. What she saw was a woman who appeared shaken but resolute, making eye contact directly and speaking with clear intention. "Miss Collins, I received a report that you might be in some kind of trouble, that someone was preventing you from leaving this property." Emma's laugh held no humor. "The only person who's been preventing me from living my own life is Marcus Davidson, and I walked away from that situation of my own free will." Pat pulled out her notepad. "Can you tell me about these 3 families Mr. Davidson allegedly maintains?" Emma recounted her discovery of Marcus's deception, providing details about the evidence she'd found on his laptop, the phone calls from children who called him daddy, the mortgage payments to houses she'd never seen. Pat's expression grew increasingly grim as the scope of Marcus's lies became clear. "Miss Collins, have you documented any of this evidence? Screenshots, photographs, anything that could substantiate these claims?" Emma pulled out her phone, showing Pat the photos she'd managed to take of Marcus's laptop screen before confronting him that morning. Bank statements showing regular payments to households across 3 states, email correspondences with different women signed with endearments, photo albums from
Birthday parties and school events featuring children who bore unmistakable resemblances to Marcus. Pat examined the images carefully, her professional experience immediately recognizing the authenticity of what she was seeing. "This is extensive. How long has this been going on?" "Based on what I've found, at least 5 years, maybe longer." Emma's voice was steady now, strengthened by having an official authority figure take her concerns seriously. "The oldest child I saw evidence of is probably 8 or 9 years old." Pat looked up from the phone, her expression troubled. "Miss Collins, what you're describing could constitute multiple felonies. Bigamy, fraud, potentially tax evasion, depending on how he's been filing returns for these different households." Jake felt a surge of validation. His instincts about Marcus had been correct. The man wasn't just a cheating fiancé, but a career criminal operating on a sophisticated level. "Officer Morrison," Jake interjected, "Marcus was here earlier making threats. He implied he had connections in law enforcement, suggested there could be legal consequences for me helping Emma." Pat's expression hardened. "What kind of threats?" Jake recounted Marcus's behavior, his refusal to leave the property when asked, his attempt to peer through windows, and his final warning about making Jake part of a situation he didn't understand. "Did he make any specific threats of violence?" Pat asked. "Not directly, but the implication was clear. He's not someone who accepts being told no." Pat closed her notepad and looked directly at Emma. "Miss Collins, I need to ask you this directly. Are you here of your own free will? Do you feel safe with Mr. Thompson and his daughter?" Emma looked at Jake, who had shown her more genuine kindness in one afternoon than Marcus had demonstrated in months of their relationship. "Officer Morrison, Jake saved my life today. Not just from Marcus, but from making the biggest mistake I could have imagined. I'm here because I choose to be here." Pat nodded, satisfied with Emma's response. "All right, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to file an incident report documenting Mr. Davidson's threatening behavior and his refusal to leave private property when requested. Ms. Collins, I strongly recommend you consider filing for a restraining order based on his pattern of manipulation and today's intimidation tactics." Emma felt a flutter of fear at the suggestion. "Will that just make him angrier?" "Possibly," Pat answered honestly, "but it also creates a legal record. If he violates the restraining order, we can arrest him immediately. Right now, we're limited in what we can do unless he actually commits a crime." Jake stepped forward. "Pat, what about those other families? If Emma's right about the scope of his deception, there are other women and children who deserve to know the truth." Pat considered this carefully. "That's where things get complicated. We're talking about potential federal crimes across multiple states. This would need to involve FBI, possibly other agencies." She looked at Emma. "Are you prepared for that level of investigation? It could take months, maybe years, to fully unravel." Emma thought about the children in those photographs, celebrating birthdays and holidays with a father who was living a lie. She thought about the other women, like her, who had restructured their entire lives around a relationship that was fundamentally fraudulent. "Those families deserve to know the truth," Emma said quietly.
I can't be the only one who walks away while other people continue living in his web of lies. Pat smiled for the first time since arriving. That takes courage, Miss Cullens. Not everyone would be willing to see this through. As Pat prepared to leave, she turned to Jake with a serious expression. I'm going to increase patrols in this neighborhood for the next few days. And Jake, I know you can handle yourself, but don't try to be a hero if Davidson comes back. Call us immediately. Jake nodded his understanding, though privately he wondered if police response would be fast enough if Marcus decided to escalate his tactics.
Drove away. Jake and Emma found themselves standing in his living room, the weight of the day's events settling over them. Lily had fallen asleep on the couch during Pat's interview, curled up with her favorite stuffed animal, blissfully unaware of the adult complications swirling around her. I should call my employer in Oregon, Emma said suddenly. Let them know I might not be back as soon as I planned. Jake realized that Emma was making a conscious choice to stay and fight rather than run again. The decision spoke to a strength of character that Marcus had tried to suppress but never fully broken. Emma, are you sure about pursuing this investigation? Pat's right that it could take a long time, and Marcus clearly has resources to make your life difficult. Emma looked at Lily, sleeping peacefully in the security of her father's home, protected by adults who put her welfare above their own convenience. Jake, what kind of person would I be if I saved myself but left those other children trapped in his lies? Jake felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of the moral courage that had drawn him to Emma from the moment she'd stumbled into the diner in her wedding dress. This wasn't just about protecting her anymore. It was about seeing justice done for everyone Marcus had deceived. Then we'll see it through together, Jake said quietly. All of it. As if responding to his words, Jake's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was brief but chilling. This is just the beginning. 3 months later, Emma stood on the courthouse steps of Denver, Colorado, watching as Marcus Davidson was led away in handcuffs. The FBI investigation had moved swiftly once Emma's evidence provided the foundation they needed. Marcus's elaborate scheme had unraveled completely when faced with federal scrutiny. The other wives, Sarah in Phoenix and Jennifer in Miami, had initially refused to believe the truth. But faced with irrefutable evidence of birth certificates, marriage licenses, and financial records spanning multiple states, they had no choice but to accept reality. The children, ranging in age from 3 to 9, were now in counseling to help them understand why their father wouldn't be coming home. Jake had driven with Emma to each court hearing, providing steady support as she testified about Marcus's manipulation and control. His presence had given her strength during the most difficult moments when defense attorneys tried to paint her as a vindictive ex-fiancé seeking revenge. It's over, Jake said quietly as they walked to his truck. Really over this time. Emma nodded, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders that she'd carried since that morning in the wedding dress. Marcus had been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for bigamy, fraud, and tax evasion. The judge had been particularly harsh about the children involved, calling Marcus's actions a betrayal of the most fundamental family bonds. During the investigation, Emma had discovered the full extent of Marcus's deception. He had used his pharmaceutical sales territory to maintain his 3 households, scheduling business trips that allowed him to rotate between families. Each wife had been carefully chosen for specific traits: Sarah for her inheritance, Jennifer for her political connections, and Emma for her artistic talents and isolated situation after her parents' death. Back in Cedar Falls, Emma had found work as a freelance graphic designer, taking on projects that allowed her to contribute to Jake's household expenses while maintaining her independence. She had insisted on paying rent for the guest room, though Jake had initially protested. Lily had adjusted to Emma's presence with the easy acceptance of childhood, delighted to have another adult who listened to her stories and helped with art projects. The little girl had never asked when Emma was leaving,
seeming to understand instinctively that some changes were permanent. The drive back to Cedar Falls took 4 hours, passing through small towns and farmland that had become familiar to Emma over the past months. She no longer felt like she was
running from something, but rather moving toward a future she was actively choosing. "What happens now?" Jake asked, as they crossed the Cedar Falls city limits. Emma smiled, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Now we go home." The word home carried weight it hadn't possessed 3 months ago. It meant Jake's house, with its comfortable furniture and Lily's artwork on the refrigerator. It meant Saturday morning pancakes and evening walks around the neighborhood. It meant belonging somewhere without having to lose herself in the process. Jake reached across the console to take her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them. Their relationship had developed slowly, built on trust and mutual respect rather than the intense passion that had blinded Emma to Marcus's true nature. That evening, as they tucked Lily into bed, the little girl looked up at them with serious eyes. "Miss Emma, are you going to stay forever now?" Emma exchanged a glance with Jake, seeing her own hopes reflected in his expression. "Would you like me to stay forever?" Lily nodded emphatically. "You make Daddy smile the way he used to smile in the pictures with Mommy." Jake's throat tightened at his daughter's observation. Sarah would have liked Emma, would have appreciated her gentleness with Lily and her determination to rebuild her life with dignity. "Then I'll stay," Emma said simply. 6 months later, Emma and Jake were married in a small ceremony at Cedar Falls Community Church, with Lily serving as flower girl and the entire town celebrating their union. Emma wore a simple blue dress instead of white, having learned that the most important element of a wedding wasn't the dress or the ceremony, but the character of the person standing beside you. Marcus's conviction had made national news, leading to legislation requiring better cross-state communication for marriage licenses. The other families had slowly begun rebuilding their lives, with Sarah and Jennifer forming an unlikely friendship based on their shared experience. Emma kept in touch with them, understanding that healing from Marcus's betrayal would take years. But she had learned that moving forward didn't require forgetting the past, only refusing to let it define the future. As Emma danced with Jake at their reception, surrounded by friends and neighbors who had become family, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Sometimes the worst thing that could happen to you was actually the first step toward the best thing that ever would. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.